Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the L&D Bookshelf. I'm your host, David Kelly, and today I'm joined by Chad Udell to talk about his book, Shock of the New. It's a book that he co-authored with the late Gary Woodill, and today, together, we're going to talk about how he created the Builds framework, a practical guide for evaluating emerging technologies and learning and development. We'll discuss the pressure that L&D professionals face to innovate and how they can think critically about new tools and technologies, which tech trends are worth watching, and how to advise all of that. And if you've ever wondered how to separate real value from shiny object syndrome, Chad's a great person to learn from. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. Chad, thanks so much for joining us.
David, very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So just as it gets started, you and I have known each other for a long time. I'm very familiar with the work that you do. But for those who might be watching who aren't as familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into L&D, and also if you could tell us a little bit about your co-author, Gary?
Ken, without going back into far deep and ancient history, I've been involved in digital technology of some kind or another, designing websites and things since basically the birth of the web. Got out of college, loved mobile devices, bought a cell phone. I mean, that was one of my first purchases that I made as a young adult entering into my own contracts. It was like that, a winter coat and a mattress or something like that, right? Like all of the things you need as a young professional in the city of Chicago, gaining your footing. Started building mobile applications basically with the birth of the iPhone, got really interested into it. And about 2010, founded a mobile application consultancy company called Float. Around that time, the iPad was just kind of like a twinkle in our eye, like it was just about to get going. Met Gary Woodill through the industry, found his book, The Mobile Learning Edge, knew that I saw something really great in that guy. The things that he was writing about were just way out there and also grounded in reality and fact. Like, man was a consummate researcher.
Uh,
And he was kind of like my AI before I had an AI. I'd bounce an idea off of him or something, and he'd be like, Nokia did that back in 1965. And then he would go and go source and find the research paper or the bibliography or something like that brought that to life and helped me understand it. He helped me. He co-edited my first book, Learning Everywhere. He was a contributing author on our second book, Mastering Mobile Learning. And then when he wanted to get together and write something that would help our peers select technology, I was down. I just was like immediately in. We named it Shock of the New in order to kind of help people understand just how much things were going to be changing in the very near future. This was 2018 and 2019, mind you. Pre-pandemic, obviously. The QR codes were an annoyance. They weren't really particularly useful at that point. But we saw a lot of things that were going to be happening around the bend that were going to be unlocked to be a number of different eventualities. And then with the pandemic, it seems to be even more prescient. Technology is accelerating with AI. It's accelerating even further and faster. And so it seems to be more relevant really now than it ever has been in my mind.
yeah, I love your description of Gary. I miss him, but I think AI before he was your AI before AI sounds very on brand for Gary. I like that a lot.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about the principles of the book. Thinking about when you and Gary sat down to write this, who did you write it for, and what do you hope they take out of it?
Yeah, I mean, we wrote it for the practitioner as well as the person that's kind of like in charge of some of the buying decisions at an organization. So maybe it's their immediate manager or perhaps some form of a committee at a business that is informing the business on what technologies to potentially secure or procure for advancing learning technology inside of an organization. And there are so many products, services, innovations that come out on a weekly basis anymore, it seems, that it can be very daunting to evaluate what is on the market, what's coming to the market, and understand how it's going to impact your business, the learners that are inside of it, and how it's going to interact with your ecosystem and all of the other components that you have. So, in an effort to kind of standardize that, normalize that, we created the framework builds, which we can get into that in just a moment, as well as provided a lot of resources to help people in the overall process of evaluating a book, almost a rubric or a scorecard of sorts. We took inspiration from there's a few different competing standards out there. One is used in US federal government technology sourcing quite regularly called Technological Readiness Level, or TRL for short, not Total Request Live, but Technology Readiness Level. That was created by the Air Force, used widely by a lot of different DoD agencies and especially NASA. It basically determines if technology is mission ready to be put into production environments or in high security, high dependency, high pressure types of situations. That is a great idea, but it doesn't necessarily match, pardon my, triteness here or whatever, but sending manned spaceships into orbit is a little bit different than preparing someone to cook French fries or deal with difficult guests or help people find the appropriate drill for their needs at a big box retail store. So there's some similarities, but they just didn't quite match. And so we really felt like Builds was kind of something that was necessary to help people understand what technology they should be purchasing for their businesses.
Yeah. I appreciate the carbon dating that you added to that by explaining what TRL was for people who are
Yes,
much younger than
absolutely.
us who have like, why are they
Yeah.
laughing about TRL? I don't understand.
If you got that joke, you should probably book your annual physician's, checkup and make sure that you're taking the appropriate supplements and getting plenty of rest.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
There are lots of things that are on our medical scorecard that we have to be taking track of at this stage.
absolutely.
So before we dive into the weeds of builds, what are some of the things that you see challenges that L&D professionals have today that build solves for?
I've got a few I think that are probably very relevant, and they do pluck from the acronym or the name Build. So, you know, as learning professionals, we went to school for cognitive design, cognitive psychology, instructional design, education, all kinds of matters that are great for building minds, but not necessarily for building businesses. And so we oftentimes are separate from or divorced from the constraints and considerations that make a business tick: profit and loss, revenue, return on investment. Sometimes we touch on ROI and things of that nature, but we're not necessarily concerned with the day to day operations of the business, but rather just making the people that are in the operations better and more effective. So, builds with the B in builds is how does this technology that you're going to be talking about interact with and impact the overall business? And then beyond that, another thing that I think on the bookend of builds, the S, is this concept of signals. We have associations like ATD, Training Magazine, a number of other groups, right, that track and index technologies, learning management systems, and authoring tools that are out there, but they're not really concerned with the broader overall technology landscape. And so, we'll have the Gartner Hype Cycle, for example, tracks all kinds of technologies across a number of different indexes in terms of how it's being broadcast out into the world. What news articles are there? What's the VC investment? What's the business climate look like around this? How many venture capitalists and private equity companies are there? What types of product roadmaps are out there? Those signals, what's in the press, is also something that a lot of L&D practitioners don't really dive too deeply into when they're evaluating technologies. And so those are definitely two priorities that I think the book shines a light on very well.
Excellent. So the framework provides a tremendous resource to evaluate learning tech, which seems to be, as long as I've been in this field since TRL was a thing, it's always been a challenge for us. Where do you see L&D teams getting stuck when they're evaluating new technology?
Uh, I mean, we are as victim to or prey to the shiny object syndrome, which you mentioned in the intro to the show, as virtually any sort of group. As if you could have a magical vitamin or dietary supplement that made you thinner, taller, slept well, better skin, like everything, you would jump right on it. And most likely that type of messaging that might come from a supplement or a business product is coming from the marketing departments. It's not grounded in reality. And so we can be subject to inflated expectations about how this is going to solve for all of our problems. It's going to be this miracle vitamin or painkiller that's going to step in and, correct all of our wrongs and make people want to take our e-learning. And it's going to give birth to the Netflix of learning inside of our organization or whatever, you know, cliche might be driving your desire to increase engagement. And so when we take a look at what is going on, I think grounding yourselves in reality, understanding that there is going to be constant change, that change is going to continue to accelerate, the buying cycles are going to continue to shorten, and we are, subject to this kind of large capitalistic engine that is marching along, introducing new products, new services, and new ventures all the time. We have to maintain some semblance of reality in terms of our expectations and grounding them for our learners. The concept of everything being better or the best thing since sliced bread just can't, it's not sustainable.
So when we think about the framework, is there one element that is most important in that regard, or maybe a part of the framework that you think most people overlook most commonly?
Yeah. So the thing that's going to resonate probably the most with the learning professional is within the builds framework. The L is learning models. So if you are largely a curriculum driven, top down organization trying to use a learning technology that is bottom up, social or informal or self regulated or self directed or something like that, you're going to have culture problems there. So assessing and understanding how that technology is typically used by an organization, whether it be product led and from the ground up like some of these smaller products that pop up, or if it's going to be top down enterprise, like large scale LMSs, you're going to probably find that middle ground that's going to meet your particular needs. And then I think that's an enabler, like that can be an enabler, I should say. The thing that can be the wet blanket is the dependencies, the D in there. And you have likely IT, legal, maybe an AI governance committee or something like that at this point, HR for compliance and regulatory. All of these are dependencies or things that need to be put in place in your organization in order to ensure that that technology is going to be usable, that it will land with some level of support, and that it's going to be given, I guess, equal citizenry in the overall technology landscape within your business.
I'd love to hear from your perspective, like what this looks like in practice a bit. So, and I want to get your opinion, but then kind of have you apply the principles of this to it. So, thinking about emerging tech and how we navigate it. Is there an emerging tech trend that has excited you that had value, or one that you think was getting hype, and then you kind of apply this framework to it, and you're like, no, this doesn't. It's just hype. It doesn't really have the relevancy that I think it deserves.
I will give one that is like somewhat of a bittersweet thing from my perspective.
Okay.
I love extended reality, augmented reality technologies and products. I have built a number of augmented reality applications over the years. I have a couple patents in the subject matter area of augmented reality, so it is near and dear to my heart. It did get quite a bit of traction coming up into pre-pandemic time. 2016 through about 2019 were banner years for investment in XR related technologies. This is when Meta was building out the metaverse, as it were, which we all know they've contracted and reversed traction somewhat on that. I will say that, the expectations just didn't necessarily meet reality. Bottom line is, in order for in order for AR or XR technologies to work really well, you need high quality devices with sensors and cameras and things like that in place. You need typically a framework or some sort of mapping of the topography and the elements in that real space. And you need some sort of AI layers in order to process all of the input and output for those XR experiences. That's a lot of dependencies to put in place in order to make sure that XR is going to work really well for your workforce. There are, of course, some trades, some businesses, and some, enterprises that this is definitely going to work for. Typically, these tend to be high risk, high reward situations where it's unless we get timely, very easy to use, digestible information to people, they're going to make mistakes that are either costly in terms of money or unfortunately costly in terms of safety and or lives. And so, XR types of technologies can funnel right into that really well. But when it's a lower ticket item and the cost doesn't match that particular expectation of the business impact and the learner model and dependencies that are in place, you're going to end up with that kind of miscalculation where I guess the numbers inside of the builds framework as you assess the completeness are just not going to hold water.
Yeah. A lot of when we talk about emerging tech, a lot of the conversation that we have around emerging tech overlaps the conversation that we have around wanting to be innovative in L&D. Like the technology often is an enabler of our desire to be
Certainly.
innovative, but it can be an overwhelming conversation. We have this pressure to be innovative in everything that we do, but there's so much technological change going on around us that it can feel overwhelming. How do you balance that in your work in terms of the need to be forward leaning and innovative without necessarily being completely overwhelmed by all the change going on around you?
Wow. I mean, so I track a lot of different news sources, bulletins, emails, blogs, podcasts, and a variety of different things. So I am constantly pulling stuff in. How I help or how I suss through it myself is I look around at my peers and see what it is that they're intaking and what their level of familiarity was. Became really enamored with, for example, GPT and LLMs and technologies like that, like many of us did a couple years ago when they first started coming out. I was approaching them somewhat skeptical from a skeptical point of view because some of the early output I didn't think was particularly good. The output is definitely getting better. The flexibility is getting better. But what really turned the tide for me on whether or not this was going to be something that was truly going to land was when not only was I talking about it around the dinner table, but my kids were, who are high
Yep.
schoolers and college age students. And then also my wife, who's a teacher. She was starting to use it for evaluations and frameworks and a variety of different tools and taking that back to her coworkers. And they were also kind of connecting with it and finding value in it too. So when I look at how the rest of the people around me are starting to use these technologies and becoming familiar with it, then I can kind of know that this is more than just a flash in the pan.
Yeah. And you've also touched on what's always been the biggest resource for me in terms of staying on top of things is I don't have time to stay on top of all these things. So I count on people like yourself who are deep in certain areas to kind of do the
Mhm.
research for me. Kind of
Sure.
it's if you're I know that if you shared something, you've researched it, you found it, you're valuable, and you share it, and that immediately gives me the credibility. And I'm like, I don't need to go find it. Chad just shared it, and to identify those people like that in your network who are deep in the spaces that you want to explore, allow them to be your unconscious curators for what you need to be paying attention to. It's always served me well.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I think in the marketplace right now, obviously AI is really, really popular. And two people in the learning industry that I check their feed all the time are Josh Cavalier and Marcus Bernhardt. And it's easy to name drop them because they're prolific. They're doing all kinds of great stuff. They tend to come from a very, I would say, unvarnished, like untainted, unbiased point of view. They're covering a lot of different aspects, not just from a learning perspective, but all the dynamics around AI. So I definitely get a lot of value out of them from a curation perspective in that subject matter.
So in the time that we have left, I want to shift gears a little bit. We've been sharing a lot about your perspective and the work that you did as an author here, but I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and have you reflect on not on the stuff that's in here, but maybe on some of the stuff that's not in here. So first off, you published this book. Life has changed just a bit in the
A
time
little.
since you wrote in the book. But when you published it, thinking back to that moment, is there anything that surprised you when it was published? Maybe something in the way people have reacted to it or applied the insights that maybe you didn't consider when you and Gary were writing it?
I mean, people come to me and they want like some sort of an evaluation or an app or a scoreboard. I like that idea. I would say if someone wants to construct something like that, some sort of a web-based wizard or something, I would be very open to discussing that type of topic with them. People want some sort of a score or a letter grade. This is an A or a B plus or a S tier technology or whatever. I think that is definitely something that could be potentially improved on. I think that looking back at it as well, while we're very technology agnostic and deliberately so, we didn't want to have it be a book about AR or AI or crypto or something else. I would say that some of the things that we've seen related to AI, specifically around legality, governance, copyright, data privacy rights, data quality, garbage in, garbage out, that type of stuff. I don't know if we necessarily dove into that as deeply as we would have now, were we to be like kind of rewriting that book. Yeah.
Well, let's explore that a little further. If so much has changed since 2018, 2019, if you were
Mhm.
going to have another edition of Shock of the New that was going to be published next year, what kind of new things what would be different about it? What might you add to it besides what you just touched on?
Well, we're always focused on emerging technologies, but I would also talk about maybe like there's a stage where like it moves from emerging to emergent or emerged, right? And like QR codes as a result of the pandemic have become a universal technology. It was born out of us not wanting to touch menus or other types of things and have a lot more hands-free types of ordering experiences or consumer experiences, but it was also enabled by the technology that was added to the operating systems around that time. They finally added a built-in QR reader to the basic camera app on iOS and Google's Android operating system. So that opened up a whole world of possibilities. And I also believe that people finally started to go, what are these squirrely little, blips or black blobs and stuff like that that are on everywhere, maybe I should be able to do something with them. So kind of understanding that state at which things move from emerging to like emerged would be also, I think, an interesting transition, because that's there are technologies that don't get past that, like they basically hit that bump and then they don't ever go past that. So I think that would be something that I would definitely like to address. I think that I might also think about, you only have so much space. You only have so much desk space, head space, cognitive space in order to handle all these products, tools, services, and solutions. Most companies have some form of SaaS fatigue, software as a service fatigue, or tool fatigue at this point. They're subscribing to all kinds of stuff, right? Like, I mean, just even look at your personal life. You've got Paramount, Hulu, Disney, Netflix, HBO, or whatever they're calling the service now. You've got all of these different subscriptions that sooner or later you have to whittle it down. And like every once in a while, you're like, why are we still subscribed to this? I don't know why we have this. Likewise with your vendor portfolio, maybe you had products or services that you no longer need. You had a custom URL shortener from Bitly, or you had a QR code
Yeah.
creation platform or app or something like that. A lot of those things are getting bundled into the larger platforms and products now, or they're also getting replaced by features or functions inside of larger platforms. I mean, it's no surprise you guys have access to all of the same press basically that I do. I'm sure that you've seen a couple of the releases that OpenAI has come out with recently, one of which was the voice API is now open, so you can integrate Chat GPT based voice into any application. So that's
Right.
going to be exploding and be everywhere almost immediately. You also have they were opening an app store. So if you had GPTs that were getting some usage and utilization, you are going to be able to commercialize those. Of course, you're going to have probably the same sort of Apple tax or Google tax where 30% will be taken out of it. But all of these are technology like policies or business models that change the actual technology that you purchase, making some products and services irrelevant or making other ones more valuable in exchange for that. It's a very strange dynamic that we live in.
It is, but we've seen it happen time and time again. I mean, when you're talking about the QR code, I remember when we needed, like, there were all sorts of apps on the App Store to read QR codes. And then suddenly, Apple and Google make one small change and it just normalizes it. It's kind of crazy how that happens.
Yep, absolutely.
So for our last question, I want to shift you from author to reader. I mentioned earlier that you are one of the people in my network that I count on to do the research. And I know you're deep in it. It's just something you're passionate about. When you share something, it matters to me. And that's one of the chief ways that I learn. So thinking of yourself as a reader, what are some of the things that you've read recently or in the past that you would recommend others check out, and what?
I mean, I do believe that there are some classics, Measure What Matters, The Innovator's Dilemma, these are stalwarts. The lean startup still contains a lot of good information in terms of understanding how to work agilely through business models that are consistently changing. And continuing to morph. Kevin Kelly's book, The Inevitable, was a genius, great book for its time. Definitely was a big inspiration behind what we did here. I think that that's probably worth a reread. And that's an anthology style book, so it's really easy to pick up a chapter, read it, put up another chapter next week or something along those lines. And then because AI is on everybody's lips and everybody's fingertips, getting smart about AI, it's not too late.
Yeah.
So and these are books that have been on my bookshelf for a couple of years, and I'm still recommending them because they're still just as relevant. Worthy AI by Amina Amonbarth. I'm going to probably butcher her last name, Amonbarth. Um, it's called Trustworthy AI is the name of the book. And then also um, uh, AI 2041 by Chu Fun, Chinese author, which is also an anthology style fictionalized account of what AI will be like in the year 2041. So it's a near future view of what we'll be able to do with AI. And what's really cool about that particular book is that is also heavily researched. While it is fictionalized, there is a fictional part of the chapter, and then there is a bibliographical part of the chapter, which dives into the research that backs the technologies that are currently used or that would be used to make that reality a future, right?
That's cool.
So it's a very cool way of looking at it through something that's easy to read from a short story perspective, but then backed up with the research, technology, patents, and other types of things that are making that particular fictionalized account possible.
Excellent. I will definitely check that one out. Chad, you always I always enjoy talking to you. You always share such great insights with everybody. I know one of the things I love about you is how giving you are to the field and to others. So if people want to connect with you or follow the work that you're doing, where can they find more information about you and the work that you do?
Absolutely. So thank you very much for that, David. You can find me on LinkedIn. Obviously, search for Chad Udell. You can search for my business, Spark Learn, up there. We're a learning management system, learning experience platform, primarily focused on frontline workers. So a lot of hospitalities, technicians, quick service restaurants. We're building some fantastic AI products and tools. I just launched a new chat feature that is highly measurable using XAPI, probably the most measurable form of AI chat in the industry right now. And of course, I go frequently coast to coast at events and conferences. In November, I'll be speaking at the Learning Guild's DevLearn conference, taking place from November 12th to the 14th. I've got a couple sessions there. Be happy to meet with you there. I will have a few copies of this with me. So if you see me at DevLearn and you want a copy of the Shock of the New, come talk to me. Find me and I will get you a copy of it. All right. And then, yeah, more digital, right? More podcasts, more viewers, more appearances, and all kinds of good stuff.
That's all reflective of the way you give back to the field, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, David.
And I thank you for watching this episode of Tales from the L&D Bookshelf. We hear every month where we invite an author from the field to talk about the insights from their book and revisit some of the things that they put together. And again, Chad, thanks for being our guest this month.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it very much. Good luck to you in the future too.
Thank you. And we'll see you next month on Tales from the L&D Bookshelf. Be sure to subscribe to be notified when each episode is published. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.